like that was just a really moving communion service. Thank you, Dale, for those thoughts. And the song afterwards, just, man, powerful stuff. So, that's why we're here today. That's why we're here today. If it wasn't for Jesus, we wouldn't be here. So we're going to go ahead and dismiss our kids for Children's Church, 3rd grade and under. And you may go with Jen. She's going to be doing the class today. All right. So we are continuing our journey through the story. Hopefully you read chapter 15 this week, because there's a lot and it's a mouthful. And I will tell you that I'm covering way too much in this sermon today. Now, Carl was like, "You're going to put us to sleep? There's no lights on in here, and it's kind of dark and it's kind of quiet, and I don't know. I don't fall asleep though, because I don't think you'll fall asleep, because there's so much in this chapter, and I don't know. Maybe you will. I don't know. But last week we talked about the division that happened in the kingdom of Israel, right? So we saw how Israel became two nations, North Israel and South Judah. And it's at this moment that God comes calling to the people of Israel. So, how many of you have a cell phone? If you got a cell phone, just show it to me. Now put it on silent if you haven't done that yet. Okay. Yep, perfect timing, because I just heard mine go off because I didn't put mine on silent, so I'm going to go ahead and put mine on silent. Stays on silent, huh? That's why no one can reach you. That's smart. No, I'm just kidding, Angel. I don't really have a hard time reaching Angel. He always gets back to me. Anyway, so you got a cell phone. How many of you have that little feature on your phone? And I think they all have it now. I don't know, but it tells you scam likely when you get a call. Some of you don't have. Actually, I think Rick still has a flip phone. You don't carry yeah, okay. So, but how many of you have that scam likely function where your phone tells you it's a scam, right? Or usually it's not really a scam. It's usually a telemarketer. I don't know why it says scam likely. Maybe that's just easier than saying telemarketer. I don't know. But a lot of times when I see that thing come up on my phone, what do? You either silence your phone, or I just, hang up and send it straight to my voicemail. And this is the choice that the people of Israel have when God comes calling. They have the choice of, am I going to listen, or am I just going to send him to voicemail and not pay attention to what he has to say? Because as you probably have realized over the course of going through the story, you realize that the goal of this whole Israel experiment that God has with these people is that he chooses them from nobody. He starts with Abraham, who literally is a nobody. He's a washed-up old man who has no chance of having any kids. And God says, I'm going to give you some kids. And then they end up as slaves in Egypt, and he creates a nation out of slaves. He blesses them. He gives them land. He makes them become large and strong. And it's at this point that God wants the surrounding nations to be asking a really important question. Why are they so powerful? Why are they so big? Why are they so blessed? And the answer was supposed to be because of their relationship with God and because of their connection to God. However, as we've seen over the course of the last several weeks, that relationship with God has degraded, and they have began to serve other gods, and they began to act just like all the other nations that God kicked out of the promised land, and just like all the other nations that were surrounding them. They began to act the same way. They did not follow God. They did not treat each other the way that God wanted them to treat each other. The 10 Commandments were forgotten. They were no longer pointing to God by the way that they lived. And if God continued to bless them, it would be sending the wrong message both to the Israelites and to the nations around them. Can you imagine me and Richard going out and partying on Sunday night? And you're like, why Sunday night? Because that's the night that preachers party, right? Because we We have church on Sunday, so we can't party on Saturday, all right? So can you imagine me and Richard going out and partying on Sunday night and, getting pulled over for drunk driving and getting thrown in the county jail and our names and, things being posted in the paper and then getting up and preaching the next Sunday? Can you imagine us doing that? What would you listen to our message? Would you pay attention? No, right? You wouldn't pay attention because our actions don't connect with what we are saying, and that is exactly why God has to do something about the kingdom of Israel. That's why he has to call them back or punish them. So today, we are going to talk about primarily the kings of North Israel. And I will just warn you, the beginning part of this message is a little bit like a history lesson, okay? And so just stick with me. I'm going to go over it real fast, and then we're going to draw some important takeaways as we go over this history lesson on the kings of North Israel. And so we left off with King Ahab. Okay, so Ahab, he reigned about 873 to 850 BC. By the way, everything that we read in our Bible, there's mentions of it in extra-biblical literature. So other nations mention these people, and so we kind of get a clue as to what years they were living and what years they ruled. Well, Ahab was an evil king, and he and his wife, a lady by the name of Jezebel, right? You were listening last week. A lady by the name of Jezebel worshipped Baal, and they instituted widespread worship of Baal all across North Israel. And it's during the reign of Ahab that a guy by the name of Elijah, a prophet, begins his ministry. One of my favorite stories of the prophet Elijah is the showdown on Mount Carmel. Did you guys read that story this week? Did you read it? It's a great story, right? So Elijah's up there, and he's in this showdown with 450 prophets of Baal. Ahab, the king, is right there. I think Jezebel's actually probably not there, but Ahab's there, and all those prophets of Baal, and they're like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to each build an altar. Elijah's going to build his altar, and all the prophets of Baal are going to build their altar. We're going to sacrifice a bull, put it on the altar, and then we're going to ask our God to bring down fire, and the God that answers is the true God. Love this story, right? It's great. And so the prophets of Baal, they're running around, they're trying to get their God to answer, and Elijah's just back there, taunting them. Maybe he's going to the bathroom, or maybe he's out to lunch, or, we don't really know exactly what he said. We just know that he taunted them. And then finally, the prophets of Baal become so desperate, they start to take knives and they cut themselves, and they're trying to get the attention of their God of Baal, and nothing happens. And then Elijah shows up, and he's like, all right, here we go. I'm gonna take this altar. I'm gonna douse it with water. I'm gonna dig a trench and fill that trench with water. And then he calls out to God, and God rains down fire immediately, and he melts he burns up the sacrifice and the wood. He melts the stones, and it licks up all the water in the trench around it. And the 450 prophets of Baal are executed as a result. One of my favorite stories. I wish I could tell you more stories of Elijah. But ultimately, Elijah continues his ministry. He calls the people back to God. But Ahab is finally killed. His son, a guy by the name of Ahaziah, succeeds him, and he reigns for a couple years. He dies, and he has no son. So instead, another son of Ahab, a guy by the name of Joram, didn't even put Ahaziah on there because he only reigns for 2 years, and nothing happens during his reign. But then a guy by the name of Joram begins to reign, and he also is a son of Ahab. And Elijah, in the meantime, chooses a successor, a guy by the name of Elisha. And Elisha immediately begins his ministry also in North Israel during the reign of Joram. And Elisha does all kinds of crazy things. Like, there's some awesome stories. I hope you guys read it. Again, he heals the sick. He multiplies bread. He heals leprosy. He purifies poisoned stew. He makes an axe head float, and he raises the dead. Like, crazy stuff. And again, all this stuff, all these prophetic, all these miracles are done to try to call the people of Israel, come back to God, come back to God. Now, there's just a little important note here that these are many of the same miracles that Jesus does, right? And so what we see is that Jesus shows up with many of the same miracles of Elisha, because Jesus is also calling the people back to God. But he's calling people to God in a whole new way. But we'll get there in the story eventually, but we won't be going there today. And so then before Elisha's ministry is over, he anoints a guy by the name of Jehu to be the next king. Jehu becomes king, and he kills Joram, he kills Jezebel, he kills all of Ahab's family because they were unfaithful. And then Jehu goes on to do the exact same things that Joram and all of his predecessors did. And finally, there's a guy by the name of Jeroboam the second who takes the reins, actually from Jehu's son Jehoahaz. And Jeroboam the second reigns in North Israel for quite a while, 788 to 747 BC. And he secures the borders of North Israel. He actually extends the borders. And believe it or not, he actually conquers a kingdom that is comparable to the size of Solomon's kingdom. Jeroboam reigned over Israel during a very prosperous time. It was a very good time to be a North Israelite person. And it's during this prosperous time that God calls two prophets to begin their ministry. Two prophets by the name of Amos and Hosea. And the reason that he calls these two prophets is because even though Israel is prosperous, they have not returned to God. They've not returned to God. So I want to give you just some highlights of these two prophets. So the first prophet is a guy by the name of Amos, and he lives in a little place. I don't know if you can even see it on the map, but there's a little place called Tekoa. It's just south of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. It's a little place right on the edge of the Judean desert. He's a shepherd, and God calls him to go and preach to North Israel. I can't imagine, right? You're just out minding your own business, watching your sheep, and then God says, hey, go preach to those, pagan North Israelites. I mean, that had to be quite a calling. But Amos answers the calling, and he preaches, and we have a book that's written that it includes many of the teachings and the prophecies of Amos. And I just want to do a quick little overview of what he taught the people of North Israel. I told you this was going to be a lot, so just buckle up and stick with me, okay? And so one of the things he emphasizes in his book is he wants justice over rituals. Okay, Amos criticizes all the religious practices when they are disconnected from ethical living. Let me tell you something. We need to read the book of Amos today, because it's easy for us to come and show up in a church and disconnect the rest of our lives from the living that God calls us to live. Same way that the Israelites did. Listen to some of his words. I'm just going to read them. Just listen. They're not going to be on the screen. God says through Amos, I hate all your shows and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. I will not accept your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I won't even notice all your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice, an endless river of righteous living. See, Amos preached social justice, but not the social justice that we hear today. Amos's social justice was totally different. His problem was that he criticized the wealthy who were oppressing the poor, who were engaging in dishonest business practices, who were living in luxury while other people suffered. I mean, listen to these words of Amos also. These are from Amos chapter 4. I love this. I love it. I mean, I would have loved to have been there when he preached this sermon. He says, listen to me, you fat cows living in Samaria. Isn't that great? You women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and who are always calling to your husbands, bring us another drink. The sovereign Lord has sworn this by his holiness. The time will come when you'll be led away with hooks in your noses. In other words, you will become slaves again. Amos had a problem with rich people who took advantage of the poor people. He had a problem with people who didn't offer a helping hand when somebody was in a difficult position. Instead, what the people of North Israel were doing is they were kicking people in the face when they were down. And that's the social justice that Amos has a problem with. If you read all through the Old Testament, what you see is that God cares about the marginalized. He cares about the people who have fallen on hard times. He cares the people that are suffering and in difficult circumstances. And he wants his people to be a place where those people are taken care of. But instead, the rich people are getting richer and the poor people are getting poorer, and the rich people are happy about it. Justice over rituals and worship practices. He also talks about divine judgment. Israel and its neighbors. If you read the book of Amos, you see that Amos doesn't just speak to Israel. He speaks to all the surrounding nations, including Judah. And the problem is that divine judgment is coming. It's coming for the people who live without focusing on the Lord, without living the way that the Lord calls them to live. And one thing that is emphasized with this divine judgment is the day of the Lord. Now, for someone living in North Israel or South Judah, the day of the Lord was actually a positive day. They would speak highly of it. It was a day when God would show up and have his final intervention in all of human affairs. He would restore all people. He would establish his rule over all the nations. That's the day of the Lord, and they were happy about it. They were excited for it. And Amos says, you're not going to like the day of the Lord. It's not going to be a good day for you. Listen to what he says in chapter 5, verse 18. What sorrow awaits you who say, if only the day of the Lord were here. You have no idea what you're wishing for. That day will bring darkness, not light, because they are not living in accordance with how God calls them to live. Third, he talks about God's sovereignty. God's not just king of Israel. He's king of all the nations, whether they acknowledge them or not, whether they acknowledge him or not, and he holds all people accountable for their actions, not just his covenant people, Israel. But finally, Amos also ends with hope and restoration. Though most of Amos's book is a warning and a judgment, the final chapter of Amos contains a message of hope and a promise of restoration and future blessing for the people who remain faithful through the difficult times. So that's the message of Amos. And I could honestly preach an entire sermon series on that book because it's amazing. It's powerful. I could also preach a full sermon series on the book of Hosea, okay? But like I said, we're just covering it really fast. So the message of Hosea is similar, but it's a little bit different because Hosea is a powerful, poetic portrayal of God's love for his unfaithful people. Now, Hosea was a contemporary of Amos, but his ministry was very different. Because one of the things that God does with Hosea is he commands Hosea to go and to marry a prostitute. Again, I can't imagine that conversation when God says, Hosea, I want you to go and marry a prostitute. And so he goes and he marries this prostitute, and her name is Gomer, by the way. Just awful, right? So so this woman named Gomer is Hosea's wife, and she continues to practice her trade of prostitution even while she is married to Hosea. And God commands Hosea to take her back and to love her. And what we see in the book of Hosea is that Hosea's personal life becomes a living parable of God's relationship with the entirety of his people. And so we see several themes come out of this book of Hosea. First of all, we see God's covenant love. God is faithful and loyal despite Israel's unfaithfulness. And I don't know about you, but I'm thankful for that. Because I have days of unfaithfulness, right? I have weeks of unfaithfulness. I have months of unfaithfulness. There's moments where I don't live like I'm a follower of Jesus. And yet God is faithful. He keeps taking us back. He loves us. But we also have to understand what it means when we go away from God. And that's another theme from the book of Hosea, is that the idea of spiritual adultery. Israel worshiping other gods is compared to the marital infidelity that Hosea is experiencing in his life. When we make things God in place of God, we are committing spiritual adultery, and it affects God the way that a cheating spouse affects you. It's a powerful illustration, right? And it's a warning. It's you are grieving God when you worship things other than him. And again, in Hosea, we see the theme of judgment. The people of Israel will be exiled for their sin. They will face punishment. But ultimately, he ends with the same thing that Amos ends with, and that is hope and restoration. The judgment is tempered by the promise that there is still hope. God will one day heal them, he will love them freely, and he will bless them again. Listen to these words from Hosea chapter 6. He says, I want you to show love, not offer sacrifices. I want you to know me more than I want burnt offerings. But like Adam, you broke my covenant and betrayed my trust. If you've ever known somebody, or maybe you've experienced it yourself, if you've ever known somebody who had a cheating spouse, the thing that they want more than chocolates or flowers or date nights or toys, whatever, is they want to be shown love. And you want to know them intimately, deeply. And this is what God says he wants from his people. This is what God wants from you and from me. He wants us to show love, not just go through the rigmarole of worship, right? He wants us to show love, and he wants us to know him, to connect with him. So ultimately what God wants. So I want to finish with just 4 takeaways. And I honestly, like I said, I could preach a long time over both these books and ministries of Elijah and Elisha. But I want to leave you with 4 takeaways that I think we can hopefully apply somewhere in our lives. But the first thing is this. Success as God's people is tied to our faithful living. And when I talk about success, I don't mean financial success. I don't mean everything in your life going right. I mean you living as God's people is tied to our faithful living. What are God's people supposed to be doing? Well, we say it here around 4th and College. We exist to love people and to lead them to Jesus, right? We exist to love people and to lead them to Jesus. But guess what? We can't carry that out when we don't live faithfully in God's presence, right? Because guess what? You're like me and Richard going and partying on Sunday night and waking up on Sunday and preaching a sermon. It falls flat because you can see that we don't really mean what we're saying. Success as God's people is tied to our faithful living. But we can't love people and lead them to Jesus if we don't live and love as Jesus would live and love if he was in our place. Right? We won't be able to accomplish our mission. Success as God's people is tied to faithful living. Number 2, when life is good, we have a tendency to get complacent and apathetic. So you see this with North Israel, right? Jeroboam II, great reign. Like all people from the outside would be looking at Jeroboam II and be saying, he is successful. Look at all the money that North Israel has. Look at how they've expanded their borders. Look at how powerful they are. But Jeroboam does not lead people back to God. And instead, the entire nation, because everything is good, becomes complacent and apathetic. And I don't think there's anything that should speak to us as American people more than this point right here. Because we have more than just about any civilization in the history of the world. The United States. Now, there are people in our nation that are struggling and that are in difficult circumstances, no doubt. But as a whole, we are one of the most blessed nations on this earth that has ever existed. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, are we allowing that to keep us from being wholeheartedly devoted to God? Do we find ourselves just slowly taking little incremental moves away from God because things are good? Because let me tell you something. When things are bad, that's when I'm like, oh, God, right? I need you. But when things are good, we have this tendency to become complacent and apathetic. Number 3, when we stray, God will call us back. When we stray, God will call us back. God will send prophets. He's given us His Word. He's given us the Holy Spirit. He will call us back. The question is, are you going to hang up on Him like you do the telemarketers on your phone? Or are you going to listen? Are you going to pay attention? Are you going to interact with Him? I don't know about you, but my life is just kind of a little replay of the story of Israel. I've noticed this in my life. You have good days and bad days. I have days when I slack and days when I'm focused on God, days when I'm in the Word, days when I forget, days when I purposely don't go there, right? Because I just don't want to. I don't want to interact with Him because I know that He's got to deal with something in my heart, and I don't want to get in that space where I'm just with Him. So I just don't do it. When we stray, God's going to call us back, but are we going to listen? And I'm wondering if there's some people in the room this morning who God is calling you back. God is saying something to you this morning and saying, come back to me. Follow me. Put your faith in me. Quit worshiping those other gods in your life. Worship the one true God. Put Him first. Will you listen? Will you listen? Will I listen? And finally, restoration is always the motivation for punishment. We see this over and over again in the prophets, that God's punishment is not done to pay you back for what you did. God's punishment is to bring you back. He wants to bring all people back to Him. God's punishment oftentimes is seen as, well, God's just up there and He's just enjoying putting His finger on me and twisting and making my life painful because I did wrong things. No, that's not God at all. He is calling you back. He is inviting you back. And here's what I want to make sure and highlight is that every terrible thing that happens in your life is not the punishment of God. Be careful with that. Because I've heard so many Christians say, well, this terrible thing, this terrible circumstance, this sickness, this person getting sick, me losing my job, whatever, is some punishment from God. Don't do that. Don't go there. Like, you'll know when your life choices have resulted in bad circumstances. And God is not doing that to punish you and pay you back. He wants to bring you back. But when there's difficult circumstances and you're like, I don't think I made decisions that brought me here, don't call that the punishment of God. It's just life. Just living in a broken world. It is an opportunity to draw closer to God, but it's not God punishing you because you did something way back when and you don't know what it was and He must just be punishing me. Don't go there. But when we are facing the results of our choices and our actions, the punishment that we face is not to pay you back. It's to bring you back. I'm going to go ahead and invite the worship team to come on up. Again, I could preach lots of sermons off of what I went over today, but we're trying to make it through this story by the end of the year, so we're covering a lot. But my hope is that you've been able to zero in on something that you needed to hear, something that calls you to action in some way. So we're going to sing a song in just a minute that's become one of our favorites around here at Fourth and College. It's a song that both acknowledges the sovereignty of God and reminds us that He wants to do things right here in our city. And my hope is that we can all join in with what he's doing. Now, may our God and Father himself make your love increase and overflow for each other and for everyone else. May he strengthen your hearts so that you will be blameless and holy in the presence of our God and Father when our Lord Jesus comes again. Amen.